So today I find myself in something a little bit extra special. It's a Porsche 911 991 GT3 RS. So my first real GT product I've reviewed on this channel. It's actually the first GT product I've driven thus far. And before we get into the video, I want to shout out Drive the Dream, which is the rental company where I was able to get this GT3 RS from. They are located here in Southern California in the Los Angeles area. So if you guys are here, definitely check them out. They have, I think, a Ferrari 458 and an Aventador, maybe a couple other cars. This is probably my favorite pick of the bunch. So check them out for sure. Also, make sure to like this video if you enjoy it. Make sure to subscribe if you want to see more content like this. It really helps my channel out. And without further ado, I want to get into why a GT3 RS is probably the most terrible car I've driven around town, so to speak. I'm just gonna get on the road and we'll get moving and we'll start discussing why I think that. So the first thing that hits you driving the GT3 RS is it's super loud. Now this particular car happens to have a GMG center exhaust, which happens to cut weight by about 8 pounds, 7 or 8 pounds, but increases the volume of the exhaust, which is already a loud exhaust, by a bit. And I'm cruising at below 3,000 RPM right now, and I mean, it's a lot. I love loud exhaust. I love a little bit of theater, but this is an attention grabber to say the least. And it's one of the most noticeable parts of the driving experience, followed right after by how obnoxiously stiff this car is. Again, this is a GT product, right? The RS in GT stands for Rennsport, which is German for racing sport. So if a standard 911 GT3 wasn't already a race car enough, the most track-focused standard 911, then this takes it one notch higher, and then the GT2 RS is just bonkers. The Widowmaker, I guess, is what it's usually called. So taking off here from a light, it's orgasmic how loud and the engine just screams. So this is a 4-liter flat six, naturally aspirated flat six, that is, producing 500 horsepower at 8250 RPM and 338 pound-feet of torque at 6250 RPM. So certainly not the meatiest and thickest power band. You do have to keep the car up in the higher rev range if you really want to get going, and that's one of the first reasons why this is not a great city car. You know, it's kind of impractical as it is to keep a car at around 5 or 6 grand up to then 7 or 8. The red line here being 8,800. That's already ridiculous. Then combining that with a ridiculously loud GMG exhaust just means you are bound to piss a ton of people off. And that moves me on to my second point, which is that it draws a little bit too much attention. Like, I'm a pretty young dude. I thought, I would love to drive a GT3 RS every single day, daily one. And first I had a Karen yell at me because my exhaust is too loud. Then I had a couple guys ask me what I do for a living. I wish it was a job that could afford me this car. But I also had a bunch of people give me a nasty stare, turn their heads, a lot of attention from older women, and trust me, it's not the kind of attention you want. It's people who think you're being, a rascal, a hoonigan, being loud, being reckless, and they want to, pick a fight with you. So that's really not an ideal, I guess those aren't ideal characteristics for a daily vehicle. Now, the GT3 RS, I don't want to say it's practical, but it has a decent amount of storage space. That's because you have a traditional standard frunk you'd find in any 911, which is decently large. And if you didn't have this aftermarket roll cage installed, you'd have a decent amount of storage in the back where you'd otherwise have rear seats in a standard 911. GT3 and the GT3 RS, as well as the GT2 RS, don't get seats in the rear. It's hard to access the rear though, because you have carbon fiber bucket seats here. They're an option, and they're definitely worth it, right? Like, they're the coolest motorsport feature of this car. They're fixed in place practically. You can lift them up a tiny bit, up and down a little bit, and manually slide them forward and back. That's about it. You definitely can't recline them, and that's why it's hard to get stuff into the back, even if you didn't have the roll cage. Here you do, and you get racing harnesses instead, which is nice for track use, in theory, which is really where this car belongs anyway. So, you do have a decent amount of storage, and you have decent visibility. I mean, your greenhouse is large. You have much larger side windows than you'd find in the likes of, say, a Lamborghini Huracan. But the downside is you have a massive wing in the back. Now, that wing is part of this car's aero, which is sweet. You have fantastic aero in the GT3 RS product, even above the standard GT3. But that even larger wing, despite being a bit higher up and actually in that case giving you more of an opening than a standard GT3 below it or beneath it, still just obstructs so much of your rear visibility and makes it so that you have to kind of focus extra hard on what's going on behind you. So that's definitely another downside of the daily drivability of this car. I can't lie though, you know, I've been bashing this car's daily drivability for a few minutes now, but it really is a sweet, sweet driving experience, and I'd be hard-pressed to find a car that can fulfill more of a dynamic experience on a windy road. I know there are certainly faster cars, but it doesn't get much better than the ingredients of rear-wheel drive, an NA motor that revs up to 8,800 RPM with 325 rubber in the rear, 265 up front, or compound tires. I mean, but again, that's where this car belongs. This car belongs out in the canyons where you can really open it up, where you're not offending and bothering people, and where hopefully maybe the roads are a bit smoother. But in the city with bumpy, pothole-filled roads, with traffic, with bystanders being offended by you, Karens, so to speak, you just don't get to enjoy this car for what it is, and you feel like it's almost a magnet for negative attention. On the freeway, cars get close to you, take a look at it, which is great, partially due to this ultraviolet purple color that I think looks fantastic. But again, it's in no way subtle, and it just brings people's attention to you, and that's not really convenient for daily driving. I start to then think, well, what would be the ideal daily 911? I already said, I believe in one of my older videos, that I think the Carrera GTS, the 991, so this generation Carrera GTS, is pretty close. Certainly the 992 Carrera S is fantastic as well. Those are pretty equivalent cars aside from being one generation apart. But I think for someone who has the budget to, you know, pay how much this car costs, which is around $200,000, it doesn't get much sweeter than a Turbo or Turbo S. Turning around reminds me that you don't have a rear view camera in this car, and I already said you have manually adjusted seats. You also have a manually adjustable steering wheel column, and you even have little cloth, or I guess nylon, pull tabs as door handles. You're missing heated and cooled seats. You just don't get any of the amenities you'd otherwise find in a standard 911. Let's see. Then you get a incredibly high revving, screaming motor. I got a lot of sun in my eyes right now, so not the best time to demonstrate this motor, but we'll find an open road in a moment and we'll rev her out. Before I forget, I want to explain a couple of the differences between this and a standard GT3. Now, this is largely true for the 991.2 generation as well, but I can't speak on the 992 generation as the RS variant has yet to be officially released. But yeah, so the main differences you get a carbon fiber hood up front, you get a carbon fiber engine cover in the rear, and some carbon fiber components around, you know, trim within the engine itself. You get louvers on the front fenders that allow for heat to escape the front wheel wells. You get wider rear fenders that are similar to the ones you'd find on a Turbo or Turbo S model. They have an intake on them as well to suck air into the engine. You get a slightly more aggressive front splitter and rear diffuser, and you know, a couple other little tiny aero bits, but mostly you get those half an inch wider wheels up front and in the rear, and you get staggered wheels, so you get 20 up front, 21 in the rear, 1 inch larger in diameter in the rear, which is not true of the standard GT3, but is true of the 992 GT3, I believe, and the 992 Carrera S as well. All right, so as promised, let's do a bit of a hard launch. Yeah, that's very theatric. It's not the fastest car I've ever driven, but it's one of the most, it's just so sensory. There's so much going on. The wheels were breaking traction, the engine's screaming, probably louder than you guys can tell on video, and there's just some like forces and G's, so to speak. I mean, they're not really G's, but just forces and sensations you feel in this car that you really don't feel in your standard 911, nor in many cars, with the exception of maybe then the McLaren, 720Ss and Aventadors of the world. I would say most your standard R8s and Huracans and certainly Turbo S's, they're faster potentially in a straight line because they are all-wheel drive, but they lack that drama and that theater that I just felt in this, and that makes this special, but again, not a good daily driver. I understand when someone says an R8 is kind of a daily driver. I understand when someone says you could potentially daily a Turbo S, but this really is not daily driving material. And another reason are these seats. So I said I love them, and I know there's a lot of videos out there of young kids like me saying, hey, I just did a 1,000-mile road trip in my carbon buckets, my 918 style buckets. And it's not impossible. I am young enough to tolerate it, especially with the suspension not in its harshest setting, which it's not right now. But the issue is, it's just, you don't have any adjustability. Sometimes you want to move your body around a little bit. It's not going to happen in these. It's just a matter of a slight height adjustment, really. You're really put in place. And I know I've also seen some people my height, I'm 6'2", add these little lifters, which lean the seat back a little bit more. I'd probably like that myself. But other than that, I'm just sitting too far upright. There isn't enough cushion. There isn't enough padding. We got water here. I got to go slow and not get this car all wet. Hopefully I didn't do too bad there. It just doesn't leave you feeling super comfortable. I don't think you'd arrive at your quote-unquote destination in this car going, wow, I'm so happy I took my GT3 RS out, unless it was a motorsport enthusiast event, in which case this car is going to get a lot of looks and a lot of respect and appreciation from fellow car enthusiasts, which have been the few people that have given me smiles, such as Taycan drivers, a couple other 911 drivers, and I believe even a 718 Spider drove by me. It's just, they were all happy. Everyone else is pretty pissed off. It's just too antisocial of a car. It does have a nose lift though. I should say that before I forget, because as I'm pulling in and out of driveways, people are mad at me that I'm taking so long, but the nose lift helps me avoid any sort of scraping, and it's actually better than the experience I've had in, say, both the 991.2 Carrera S and GTS I drove, both of which had that Porsche PASM suspension, but lacked a front lift. So those scraped more or more tricky to deal with. This pops right up with the hit of a button and then drops right down like on bags. So that's nice. Here we go. I got another little bit of love from that Cayman driver. Yeah, so that's kind of the gist of it, guys. I'm driving it here in normal city, circumstances because it's a rental car. I'm trying to respect the rental company, of course, but it's a fun car to drive. I'm happy I got to get behind the wheel of it and drive it around for about, 30 minutes to an hour. I will give you guys a few more fat rips before I call it quits, but that's the main gist of it. It doesn't carry many tall boys. It doesn't carry more than 2 people, not very comfortably. It's hard to get in and out of driveways, even despite the lift. You're always scared parking at places. Everyone's staring at you. It's too loud. It's too rough. But with all of that said, it's one of the most blissfully perfect, exciting, theatric, and sensory driving experiences I've ever experienced in my whole life. And there's just nothing like revving out a flat 6 Porsche motor to around 8,800 RPM, matter of fact, and just hearing that GMG exhaust scream as you offend everybody within about a 500-yard radius of you. So without further ado, I will do a rip or two. Here we go. Whew. Sheesh. Well, there you guys have it. I gave you a little rip. This is like the one car that I filmed where I'm scared to rev it. I'm scared to do anything because it keeps drawing negative attention. So I'm gonna keep it low key. I'm not gonna push my luck. I don't wanna deal with any more Karens. And all I'm gonna ask is you guys like, comment, subscribe, do your thing. Thank you guys for watching, and hopefully I can bring you guys a bunch more content like this. As always, this is Rio. Peace out.